Alejandro had always been known as a man of strength and unwavering determination. In his prime, he carried himself with quiet confidence, a pillar in his community, a loving husband, and a devoted father. Yet nothing in his life had prepared him for the battle that lay ahead. When the doctor's words came, they shattered the foundation of his carefully ordered existence. Diagnosed with advanced Hodgkin's lymphoma, Alejandro was forced to confront a hidden enemy that attacked him from within. Despite his dedication to a healthy lifestyle, a balanced diet, and yearly checkups, fate had dealt him a cruel hand. The diagnosis arrived as a bolt out of the blue. In the sterile confines of the oncology office, the doctor explained that although his condition was grave, there remained a small chance, a slender hope, if he were to endure an intense course of chemotherapy. That day, the conversation was punctuated by a mixture of clinical detachment and hesitant optimism. Alejandro clung to that glimmer of hope even as he struggled to comprehend the reality of his situation. Determined to face the looming tempest head-on, Alejandro decided to share the news with the two people closest to his heart, his wife Juana, his steadfast partner for 15 years, and his teenage daughter Camila, whose laughter had once filled their home with light. One evening, gathering them around the modest dining table in their lovingly maintained house, he spoke in a soft but resolute tone. "There is something I must tell you," he began, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "I have seen a doctor. He confirmed that I have an illness, one that we must fight together. They say the odds are slim, but there is hope if we do everything we can." In that moment, the faces of Juana and Camila shifted, one part shock, one part sorrow. Their eyes mirrored the collision of disbelief and dread, yet even in their silence, an unspoken bond of resolve took root. Alejandro's announcement was not just a confession of his own mortality, but also a rallying cry for unity in the face of overwhelming odds. Thus began the grueling journey through chemotherapy, a series of treatments that pushed his body to its limits. Each session was a brutal exam of his endurance. The man who once prided himself on his robust health now found himself reduced to a shadow, barely able to recognize the frail figure emerging from each hospital visit. Returning home after treatments became a battle in itself. Simple acts like eating, bathing, or even a brief walk in the garden were transformed into daily duels with a relentless, invisible foe. Financial worries, too, lurked at the edges of his mind. Yet Alejandro was not unprepared. Between the savings he had built up over the years, the secure health insurance, and a modest inheritance from his grandfather, he managed to ease his concerns about the costs of treatment. The family's home, laden with cherished memories of happier times, had been paid off entirely, and Camila's academic future was safeguarded by funds set aside to ensure her education no matter what calamities befell them. Juana and Camila, in their own way, poured every ounce of love and care into supporting Alejandro. The house, once a sanctuary of familial warmth and shared laughter, had now transformed into a quiet battleground where each day was marked by the ritual of care. Juana meticulously prepared meals, monitored every dosage of medication, and accompanied Alejandro to every chemotherapy session. Camila, despite the burdens of adolescence and mounting school assignments, did her part, albeit sometimes reluctantly. There were days when she would dismiss his pleas for a simple walk in the sun, citing endless homework and responsibilities. Her indifference was subtle at first, a missed glass of water here, a postponed stroll there, but gradually, Alejandro began to sense that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamics of their once inseparable unit. Over the course of 2 long months, the emotional strain took its toll. The weight of caregiving, combined with the harsh reality of his declining physical strength, bred an undercurrent of tension within the home. One morning, following a particularly exhausting chemotherapy session, Alejandro was taken aback when Juana suggested that he take a ride in an Uber to his next appointment. The suggestion was delivered in a tone so matter-of-fact it chilled him. It was as if the closeness they once shared was dissolving into a distant, measured practicality. That day, returning home to find the atmosphere palpably different, Alejandro gathered Juana and Camila around the table once more. The room, lit by the soft glow of the early evening sun, bore witness to a conversation fraught with emotion and unspoken regrets. "Something has changed between us," Alejandro said gently, his eyes searching theirs for the truth behind their recent actions. "I feel a distance that wasn't there before. Please tell me if there's something I need to understand." Juana's eyes brimmed with unshed tears as she spoke. "Alejandro, it isn't that we care any less. It's just, I am exhausted. I feel overwhelmed by the constant demands, by the unending responsibility. And sometimes Camila too, She is growing apart, wrapped up in her own world. Camila, head bowed in reluctant agreement, nodded silently. In that moment, Alejandro realized that the pressure of his illness was fracturing the very bonds that had once sustained him. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but even amidst the pain, he sought a solution. I know how hard this is, he said softly, but perhaps we can find a way to ease the burden. What if we bring someone in, a professional nurse, perhaps, to help with my care? It was a suggestion that many in his position had resorted to. Juana and Camila exchanged hesitant glances, and after a brief, wordless deliberation, they consented. Within a week, a new presence entered their home, Romina, a nurse whose kind eyes and gentle manner promised relief. Her arrival, however, heralded unexpected complications. Initially, Romina's presence seemed a blessing. She took over many of the daily chores and medical routines, providing care with a professionalism that was both comforting and efficient. Yet as days turned into weeks, Juana began to feel a subtle intrusion. The nurse's constant presence in their home, a home that had once been a private sanctuary, started to ignite feelings of jealousy and insecurity. The knowledge that another woman was there, sharing intimate moments of care with Alejandro, was a bitter pill for Juana to swallow. Alejandro, perceptive as ever, noticed the shift in Juana's demeanor. In hushed conversations, he attempted to reassure her, suggesting that perhaps they could share the responsibilities more evenly with Romina. But the efforts only served to highlight the widening chasm between them. The unspoken tension grew heavier with each passing day until it was impossible to ignore. One afternoon, as Alejandro prepared for his next treatment, the shrill ring of the telephone cut through the quiet hum of domestic routine. On the other end of the line was his mother-in-law, a woman whose disapproval had always simmered just below the surface. In a voice laced with indignation, she castigated him for allowing a stranger to invade their family home. I cannot understand how you permit this, she snapped. Do you not realize what others might think about our family's reputation? Alejandro tried to respond calmly, explaining that Romina was merely a professional whose sole purpose was to help him during this difficult time. Yet the conversation left him feeling dismayed, as if every step forward in his recovery was being shadowed by the ghosts of familial expectations and societal judgment. For a time, life continued in a muted state of unresolved tension. Alejandro focused on his recovery, drawing strength from the hope that the end of chemotherapy might mark a new beginning. Slowly, his body began to show signs of improvement. The once relentless assault of the disease began to ebb, and in its place, a tentative promise of renewal emerged. But the undercurrents of discord at home had not abated. One seemingly ordinary day, after a taxing session at the hospital, Alejandro returned home to discover a moving truck parked silently in front of his house. Standing beside the truck was Juana, her expression a blend of determination and resignation. Alejandro, she said coolly, Camila and I have decided to move. We're going to live with my mother while you recover. The words struck him like a physical blow. What? Are you leaving me like this? He asked, his voice trembling between disbelief and despair. No, she replied evenly. It's only temporary. You need to focus on getting better. I can't bear the weight of everything any longer. In that moment, Alejandro felt the fissures of his once unbreakable family splintering wide open. The familiarity of the home, laden with decades of shared memories, was suddenly alien, a monument to a past that was slipping irretrievably away. As Juana continued to load boxes into the moving truck with deliberate efficiency, Alejandro stood silently in the doorway, his heart torn between the desperate need for connection and the bitter sting of abandonment. In the weeks that followed, Alejandro wrestled with an overwhelming sense of loneliness. His body continued its slow recovery, but the emotional scars left by the disintegration of his family were raw and unhealed. With Juana and Camila gone, the silence of the house was oppressive, a constant reminder of the love that had once filled its rooms and the betrayal that now haunted its corridors. Yet even in his isolation, life had unexpected turns in store. As the days turned into months, Alejandro gradually began to rebuild the fragments of his identity. His determination to survive, both physically and emotionally, drove him to seek new paths. When his oncologist declared him in remission, Alejandro felt as though he had been granted a second chance. The man who had fought through the darkest hours of his life now found himself facing a future that was uncertain but filled with possibility. A year after his recovery, Alejandro was approached by his former employer with an offer to return to work, albeit from the comfort of his own home. The prospect of rejoining the professional world, of reclaiming a semblance of normalcy, stirred something deep within him. Though the home he had once known was steeped in painful memories, he decided it was time to let go of the past entirely. With a heavy heart, he put his house on the market, entrusting the sale to Romina, who had become not only his caretaker but also a steadfast friend during his darkest days. The sale of the house was not merely a transaction, it symbolized a final severance from the ties that had bound him to a life marred by betrayal and sorrow. Alejandro moved to a smaller, quieter neighborhood, a place that promised a fresh start, away from the ghosts of his former life. Here, he discovered a new passion, carpentry. In the measured strokes of a chisel and the intricate joining of wood, Alejandro found a form of therapy that soothed his wounded soul. Every crafted piece was a testament to his resilience, a small monument to the hope that, even after devastation, beauty and purpose could be reborn. It was during this time of renewal that a chance encounter would stir the embers of mystery once again. One crisp morning, while Alejandro was returning from a hardware store laden with supplies for his latest carpentry project, he found his new neighbor waiting at his doorstep. Melanie, a gentle yet perceptive woman known in the community for her warm demeanor, wore an expression of concern that immediately set Alejandro's nerves on edge. "Good morning, Alejandro," she greeted him softly. "May I have a word?" Intrigued and cautious, he invited her to sit on a weathered wooden bench in the small garden beside his house. The air was cool, and the early light of dawn cast long shadows that seemed to hint at secrets waiting to be unraveled. "There's something I need to tell you," Melanie began, her voice low and measured. "I've seen something that might pertain to your past. 2 women were near your old home yesterday. One appeared older, with short, dark hair, and the other, she looked much younger. They seemed to be searching for you." A chill ran down Alejandro's spine. Memories of Juana and Camila flooded back, mingled with a sense of disbelief. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did they know where I live?" Melanie's eyes softened with empathy, yet her tone carried an unmistakable urgency. "I don't know all the details, Alejandro, but they circled around your house, knocking on the door. I suspect they're connected to your former life, perhaps seeking what they believe is theirs." Unsure whether to dismiss the unsettling news as a mere misunderstanding or as a portent of more sinister developments, Alejandro thanked Melanie and promised to look into it. That evening, as he sat in the quiet solitude of his new living room, his mind churned with questions. Had his ex-wife and daughter really returned? And if so, what were their true intentions? In the days that followed, Alejandro grew increasingly vigilant. The memories of abandonment mingled with a dawning sense of foreboding. One evening, while he was busy in his modest workshop crafting a new piece of furniture, the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside caught his attention. Peering through the window, he saw a moving truck parked near the entrance of his former home, a sight that sent a shock of recognition through him. Before he could process the image fully, a familiar voice called out from the distance. It was Juana, her tone cool and resolute. "Alejandro, we're leaving," she said simply, her eyes betraying nothing of the turmoil beneath. "Camila and I have made arrangements to stay with my mother until you're better. It's the best decision for all of us." The words reverberated in his mind as he tried to reconcile the woman he once loved with the stranger who had just spoken. The sudden decision to abandon the home they had shared for so long was both unexpected and deeply painful. It was as if the very foundations of his life were crumbling, leaving him stranded in a maze of betrayal and unresolved longing. Days turned into weeks, and while Alejandro's physical strength slowly returned, his emotional world remained a battleground of memories and unanswered questions. The sense of isolation was nearly suffocating. He missed the comforting presence of his family, yet their absence was a constant reminder of the deep fissures in their relationships. The arrival of Romina had been a lifeline in many ways, yet her presence also underscored what he had lost, a sense of intimacy that now belonged only to the past. Then came another twist that deepened the mystery. One quiet afternoon, as Alejandro was meticulously sanding a piece of reclaimed wood in his workshop, his phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number he didn't recognize. With a cautious air, he answered, and the voice on the other end was one he had not heard in years, a trembling, urgent whisper. "Alejandro, it's your brother, Jalil," the voice said. "I need you to come to my place right away. There's something you must see, something about what's happening with your past." Without hesitation, Alejandro left his workshop, the echoes of his hammer and chisel still mingling with the pounding of his heart. When he arrived at his brother's modest apartment, Jalil wasted no time in recounting what he had heard. According to Jalil, there had been reports in the neighborhood Strangers had been seen prowling near Alejandro's old home, and some even claimed they recognized features reminiscent of Juana and Camila. The idea that his former wife and daughter might be attempting to reclaim a stake in his past, perhaps the inheritance he had left behind, filled Alejandro with a profound sense of dread. That very night, as a storm gathered on the horizon and the wind whispered secrets through the trees, Alejandro's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Romina. In a terse text, she informed him that she had received a call from the police. Apparently, someone had attempted to force their way into the house that had once belonged to him. The text was followed by a single line: "Be careful, time is running out." The next morning, Alejandro's suspicions were confirmed in a way that he had never imagined. As he sat in the quiet of his new home, his eyes fixed on the security camera footage streaming on his laptop, he saw two figures approaching the door of his former residence. The images were grainy, yet unmistakable. The older woman's familiar silhouette, with a determined set to her jaw, and the younger figure whose posture and features stirred memories of a happier time long past. The realization struck him like lightning. His ex-wife and daughter had returned, not merely to claim a portion of his inheritance, but to force their way back into his life. Overwhelmed by a mixture of anger, sorrow, and disbelief, Alejandro knew he had to act. He contacted Romina immediately, his voice trembling as he demanded details about the attempted break-in. Romina's reply was measured but urgent. "They were aggressive, Alejandro. I fear that if you do not secure everything soon, they may try to take more than just what they believe is theirs. I've already contacted my lawyer to verify that the house is now solely in my name." This revelation, that the house, once a symbol of a lifetime of memories, had been legally transferred to Romina's name, added a new layer of complexity to the unfolding drama. It was as if every asset, every remnant of Alejandro's past, had become a battleground for forces he no longer fully understood. His ex-wife's bitter insistence on reclaiming what she thought was rightfully hers was now met with the legal fortification of Romina's protection. Yet the sight of those two figures on the security footage stirred a maelstrom of emotions within him. The days that followed were a whirlwind of tense phone calls, hushed conversations with his brother Jalil, and furtive glances at his security monitor. Alejandro's heart pounded every time the screen flickered, each unexpected movement on the footage a reminder of the unresolved ties that had once bound him to his family. Then came another startling development. One ordinary morning, while he was returning from the hardware store with supplies for his carpentry projects, a commotion outside his new home caught his attention. Two elderly neighbors were trying desperately to calm someone down. Rushing to the window, Alejandro's eyes widened in shock as he recognized the unmistakable features of his ex-wife, Juana, standing in the garden, her face a mask of anger and regret. Beside her, Camila, no longer the timid teenager he remembered but a young woman whose features had matured into something both familiar and strangely unrecognizable, was arguing in hushed, urgent tones with another neighbor. Alejandro's heart sank. This was not the reunion he had ever imagined. The presence of Juana and Camila, in such a public and disorderly manner, signaled that their return was not born out of love or reconciliation, but of something darker, a desperate bid to reclaim control over a past that was no longer theirs. The neighbors whispered among themselves, their voices laced with a mixture of pity and disapproval. In that moment, Alejandro realized that the mystery of their return was far from resolved. Driven by a sense of duty and a lingering hope for closure, Alejandro stepped outside. The cool air did little to calm the storm raging within him as he approached the small group. Juana's eyes met his, and for a fleeting moment, there was a glimmer of the woman he had once adored. But before he could speak, a sudden shout interrupted the tense silence. One of the neighbors, emboldened by the gravity of the situation, demanded an explanation. In the ensuing chaos, accusations flew, voices escalated, and the fragile calm of the neighborhood was shattered. Amid the uproar, the police arrived. Officers moved swiftly, their presence imposing and final. In the confusion that followed, Juana and Camila were detained. Alejandro watched from a distance, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions, relief mingled with sorrow, and a gnawing sense of inevitability. His ex-wife and daughter, it seemed, had crossed a line from which there was no return. Later that day, as Alejandro sat alone in the quiet of his new home, he tried to piece together the fragments of what had transpired. The legal and personal consequences of their actions began to unfold. Juana's aggressive attempts to reclaim what she believed was hers, Camila's silent acquiescence to a plan that had betrayed their past intimacy, and the final, irrevocable transfer of ownership of the family home to Romina. All of these had led to a point where Alejandro was left standing alone, both physically and emotionally, facing a future that was as uncertain as it was uncharted. In the days that followed, the legal process moved with a relentless certainty. Juana and Camila, it turned out, were not only charged with attempted burglary but were also embroiled in a series of legal disputes over the inheritance and ownership of property. The proceedings were public and humiliating, a bitter end to a chapter that had once promised love and unity. News of their misdeeds spread through the neighborhood, and soon, the whispers of scandal reached even the most distant corners of Alejandro's past life. Yet amidst the chaos, Alejandro found a curious sense of liberation. In relinquishing the painful remnants of his old life, he was able to focus on rebuilding a future that was truly his own. With Romina's unwavering support, and the steady encouragement of his new neighbor Melanie, he began to rebuild not only his physical strength but also his spirit. The memories of betrayal, abandonment, and loss still haunted him, but they no longer defined him. They had become lessons, a stark reminder that those who manipulate and exploit the vulnerabilities of others ultimately find themselves isolated, bereft of true companionship and support. As time passed, Alejandro immersed himself in his work and his newfound hobby. Carpentry became more than just a pastime. It was a medium through which he could channel his pain, express his creativity, and slowly mend the fissures in his heart. With every carefully crafted piece of furniture, every delicate curve and join, he reclaimed a part of himself that had been buried under layers of despair and sorrow. In the quiet solitude of his workshop, surrounded by the scent of fresh cut wood and the soft hum of machinery, Alejandro began to dream of a future where trust and hope could once again take root. He reconnected with old friends and gradually re-entered the professional world, working from home under arrangements that allowed him to nurture both his body and his soul. The scars of the past remained, but they served as a reminder of his resilience, a testament to the strength that had carried him through the darkest chapters of his life. Yet even as he forged ahead with cautious optimism, the mystery of his former family's abrupt reappearance lingered like a specter in the back of his mind. Melanie, whose initial encounter had stirred a mix of concern and curiosity, continued to be a quiet presence, a compassionate confidant who offered him both friendship and counsel. One afternoon, as they sat together on a small bench in a community garden, Melanie confided in him once more. "I know you've been through unimaginable pain," she said softly, her eyes reflecting the gentle light of the setting sun. "But sometimes the past has a way of reaching out to us when we least expect it. There are still questions left unanswered, secrets that may never fully reveal themselves, but perhaps that uncertainty is what makes life so precious and so mysterious." Her words resonated deeply within Alejandro. He realized that the unanswered questions, the unresolved mysteries, were part of the tapestry of his life. They reminded him that even in moments of profound loss and betrayal, there remained the potential for growth, renewal, and ultimately, forgiveness. And while he knew that he might never fully understand the motives behind Juana and Camila's desperate actions, he also recognized that their choices were reflections of their own pain, a pain that had driven them to act in ways that could no longer be justified. Months later, as autumn leaves began to fall in a cascade of vibrant hues, Alejandro received one final, unexpected call. A call that would bring the past crashing into the present with the force of a tidal wave. It was from Romina, whose tone was tinged with urgency and trepidation. "Alejandro," she said, "there is something you need to know. There's been another development regarding your former home. Your ex-wife and daughter, they were not acting alone. I received a message today from a woman who claimed she saw them with another person, a man whose face was shrouded in shadow. They were discussing plans to reclaim not just the house, but something far more significant." Alejandro's heart raced. The layers of mystery were deepening, and he found himself drawn into a web of secrets that he had long thought was behind him. Who was this mysterious figure? What was it that they hoped to recover? And how did it all tie back to the inheritance, the legacy of a life he had once cherished? With the steady support of his brother Jalil and the gentle counsel of Melanie, he began to piece together the fragments of this new puzzle. Every conversation, every whispered rumor, added to the intricate mosaic of a past that was now entwined with his present. The investigation, carried out quietly and with meticulous care, led Alejandro to confront uncomfortable truths about the relationships that had once defined his life. Documents surfaced that hinted at ulterior motives, hidden clauses in a will, and family secrets long buried beneath layers of time and neglect. It was as if his entire existence had been orchestrated by forces beyond his control, fate, perhaps, or the inexorable pull of destiny. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that life was rarely as straightforward as it seemed. In the final chapters of this long and winding tale, Alejandro found himself standing at a crossroads. On one side lay the painful memories of a past marred by betrayal, abandonment, and legal battles, a past that had left scars both visible and hidden deep within his soul. On the other side lay the promise of a future built on hope, resilience, and the possibility of redemption. Though he knew that the mystery of his former family's motives might never be fully resolved, he also understood that he had the power to choose the path forward. With quiet determination, Alejandro resolved to let go of the bitterness and pain. He made peace with the fact that the actions of Juana and Camila, however misguided, were part of a larger tapestry of human frailty and suffering. The legal battles eventually concluded, with community service orders for Camila and a more severe penalty for Juana, and in time, the neighborhood began to whisper of the lessons learned from their downfall. In their place, Alejandro's life blossomed anew. He embraced his work, nurtured the bonds of friendship, and found solace in the simple pleasures that he had once taken for granted. Now, standing in the soft glow of twilight on the porch of his modest new home, Alejandro gazed out at the quiet street, where the echoes of the past had finally begun to fade. The mystery of his family's abrupt return, the betrayal that had cut so deeply, and the legal battles that had followed, all of it had led him to this moment of quiet reflection. Those scars remained, they were now reminders of the battles fought and the strength that had carried him through. In that moment, as the sky darkened and the stars emerged one by one, Alejandro felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance he had been given, for the support of those who had stood by him when the world had seemed intent on tearing him apart, and for the resilience of the human spirit, a spirit that, despite all odds, continues to seek light even in the darkest of times. The journey had been long, and the mystery had been deep, yet Alejandro now understood that life, with all its twists and turns, was a story of constant rebirth, a narrative written not only in the triumphs of recovery but also in the lessons learned from loss. And as he stepped forward into a future that held both promise and uncertainty, he carried with him the knowledge that the true inheritance was not the material wealth of a home or the legacy of a family name, but the quiet strength born of enduring love, compassion, and the courage to start anew. In the end, Alejandro's story was not one of bitter regret but of profound transformation. It was a tale of a man who, having been left to battle his demons alone in the harshest of storms, ultimately discovered that even in the depths of despair there lay the seeds of hope. And in that hope, he found the strength to rebuild his life, not as a prisoner of the past, but as an architect of his own destiny. This is the story of Alejandro, a man who battled not only a deadly disease but the unpredictable storms of human relationships and betrayal. His life, once defined by routine and order, became a canvas painted with sorrow, resilience, and ultimately, renewal. As the echoes of his past faded into the quiet hum of a new beginning, the mystery of what once was remained a reminder that even in the most heart-wrenching trials, the human spirit can rise again, reborn in the light of hope and the promise of a better tomorrow. Thank you for reading this long, suspenseful, and emotional retelling of a true story, a story of loss, betrayal, mystery, and ultimately, redemption. May Alejandro's journey inspire you to find strength in the darkest moments and hope in the promise of new beginnings.
Subscribe now. Join us today. Enter beyond reality, where enchanting story times, thrilling mysteries, and timeless adventures ignite your imagination. Subscribe now. Join us today.